Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marcia Gordon, and I'm the President and CEO of the Business Council of Westchester. We're so pleased to have hundreds of people on each one of these webinars in live time, on Facebook Live, and in the BCW's Anti-Racism Resource Center viewing afterwards from all across New York State. Again, to view any of the last 3 weeks sessions, you can view the videos on the BCW's website. We have received exceptional feedback on the content, so be sure to watch them and also share them with your colleagues. The Business Council of Westchester is committed to standing against racism and to create a call to action for all of our members to make a difference in the communities that we all represent. We will continue to seek opportunities for the BCW to play a critical role in both advancing the conversation about dismantling racism and in taking actionable steps to support real change. As many of you know, we recently announced our first steps in our multifaceted program that includes listening, actions, resources, programming, and more. And we are so pleased to have so many other strong voices in our community join us in partnership to continue with the fourth in this series of educational sessions with today's on what you need to know about demonstrations. Now, I also want to mention, because the next two are a little bit switched up and they're going to be on Tuesdays. So the next one is next Tuesday at 11 o'clock. Which is coping with civil unrest. So please mark your calendar for August 4th. And the following Tuesday on August 11th is self-care in the face of trauma. So please mark your calendar now. I really want to thank all of our partners who help us get the word out to their members and their constituents throughout the state. First of all, our presenting partner, Balancing Life's Issue, and our event partners, the Business Council of New York State, Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors, the Hudson Valley Gateway Chamber of Commerce, the New York State Economic Development Council, the Westchester Putnam Workforce Development Board, and the Putnam County Business Council. Thank you so much for your partnership and for the great work that you do. Now, I would like to introduce our chairman, Heidi Davidson, the co-founder and CEO of Galvanize Worldwide. Heidi?
Thanks, Marcia. Good morning, everyone. I'm also glad that you've joined us today, and I'm pleased to represent the Board of Directors of the Business Council to welcome you to this anti-racism educational series. And I also thank all the partners you see on your screen today. As Marcia mentioned, the BCW is committed to standing against racism. We are joining forces at the federal, state, and local levels with business organizations that share our same desire to create a call to action for all of our collective members to make a difference in the communities that we operate in. Our goal is to advance the conversation to end racism with actionable steps to support real change. We hope that you are finding these sessions valuable. We're excited about the volume of views and the number of people who are joining and the engagement of those people as we go through each section. Our session, and we hope that you're sharing these links with your entire company, your business network, anyone that you have a relationship with. They are free, so please encourage others to attend. The schedule will be shared in the chat shortly, but it also can be found at the BCW's website at www.thebcw.org. Please help us spread the word. Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you for your great leadership. Now I would like to introduce Sherry Gilbert, professional speaker and corporate trainer. Sherry Gilbert is a professional speaker and corporate trainer with over 20 years experience. She has worked as an adjunct professor in criminal justice, and she's a peace officer standards and training certified instructor, a law enforcement officer, a correctional officer, a hostage negotiator, a crisis intervention coordinator, and a public relations officer. I'm blown away, Sherry. She is a certified trainer with NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and has taught such topics as intellectual development disorder and ADHD, LGBTQ youth, commercial sexual exploitation of youth, the system serving Georgia's youth, and bullying, cyberbullying. She has provided professional development for over 300 police and security personnel in various topics to include cultural diversity, policing the mentally ill offender, health and wellness, and other various law-related topics. As an adjunct professor, she taught Corrections 101, Intro to Criminal Justice, Criminal Law, Forensic Science, Criminal Investigations, Search and Seizure, and other law enforcement related topics. Have you ever been on Law and Order? You should be, Sherry. She's a licensed professional counselor and holds a Master of Science degree in community counseling and majored in children and family therapy and minored in dual diagnosis. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice. It's my pleasure now to turn this over to Sherry Gilbert. Sherry?
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today's session, What You Need to Know About Demonstrations. I look forward to talking to you today and discussing not only why people demonstrate, but also discussing with you the history of our civil rights movements and what leads to demonstration and what leads to us to enact change through demonstrations. First of all, let's talk about why we demonstrate. We know we demonstrate because the rich history that we have given to civil unrest that has brought about the changes that we need to have has been woven into the fabric of America. And so we know that demonstrations, we know that they work. We know that they help enact change and change policy. And so we've been given, first of all, the right under our First Amendment rights. We've been given the right to protest. We've been given the right to assembly, the right to association, free association, and freedom of speech. So you still may ask yourself, why do we demonstrate? Well, some of the reasons why we demonstrate is, first of all, to acknowledge the pain, the past pain. And this pain is like a sore. And you know, if you have a sore and you put a bandage on it and it never heals, every time something happens, that bandage get ripped off, and then you're exposed again and you're hurting all over again. So civil unrest in today's society is sort of like that bandage that is placed over a sore that never healed. And so people protest as a way to release that pain. It's the emotional release of the pain that they feel from things seen in the past. What are some of the things that, and I'll drop it in the chat feature, what are some of the things that you know of in the past that may have led to civil unrest in today's society? So I'm going to repeat the question just so you know. I see some things coming through, but I want to repeat the question as well. What have you seen in the past that happened in the past that may have led to the civil unrest that we see today? Someone says Birmingham bombing, lack of social justice. Someone says lack of equality, not a level playing field, slavery, killing of unarmed Black men by police, inequality, police brutality, slavery. I see a lot of good things coming up in the chat feature. Killing of unarmed Black men and women by police. Institutionalized racism, systemic prejudice. As we see other things come in the chat feature, I'm going to move on. And I want to talk a little bit about the social rage that we see. We know that the harvest of unrest in our community has not just happened. It was planted a long time ago, before now. As a matter of fact, it was planted at our nation's founding, when our nation was founded. And so the pain that we feel and the social outrage that we experience is not something new. It's something that has been around for a long time. As a matter of fact, probably about over 400 years. And the reality of racism in today's society is that it still exists. No matter what we do, and even the little changes that we make, we know that, first of all, racism still exists. So in order to be able to understand some of the things that we demonstrate for, we have to know about the history. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history today as well. So let's go into poverty. We know that poverty, first of all, still exists. Those are these is a reason why we still protest today. We know that there is inequality. We know that there is we know the unemployment rate is at an all-time high, especially now that we have the pandemic going on. There's a lot of uncertainty going on since we have the pandemic. And so what are some other things that you can add to this list as well? I see some more coming in. I see social injustice, coping with civil unrest, self-care. Okay, those are the dehumanization of people of color. I see racial profiling. So we still have some things coming in the chat feature. Unemployment and the stock market are at an all-time high. So we know that based upon all the things that you're telling me now, we know that this is something continuous and that we still have a lot of work to do. And so we really need to get to understand not only what's happened in our past, but how can we go forward to help ourselves do better in the future and be more intentional. So let's talk about our history for a minute. What do you see in this list right here that you may recognize? Does anybody recognize anything that's happened in our history? Is there anything on this list you don't recognize? Is there anything you think we should add to this list of our history? Someone says they don't recognize what happened in Watts. Hangings in 1960. Someone wanted to add that. Emmett Till. Who said 34 deaths and the 45 deaths don't know about? Is there anything else that you may not know about that's on this list? Okay, let's talk about in 1865, we know that 6 Confederate veterans met in Pulaski, Tennessee. They started a secret social society that was supposed to be initially like a social club, and it quickly turned violent. And this group we know as the KKK, and they wanted to enact change, and they were championed by radical Confederates and Republicans in Congress. And they were, first of all, they marched and protested against Catholicism. They were against homophobia, against racism. They were anti-Semitism. Different. They burned, murdered, assaulted. They were involved in a lot of different things that were not peaceful. And so this group still, we know for a fact that they still run today. They still are a group, and we have other groups as well. And so someone say the KKK is a terrorist group. I want to just go to the chat feature for a minute. Juneteenth should be added. There are a lot of things that should be added to this list. So another thing is the Red Summer of 1919, where there were 27 separate race riots. We know that in the summer of 1919, between May and October, there was a bunch of riots, a series of riots that took place because the World War veterans that were Black Americans wanted the same treatment as white Americans. And so they coined that year, the 1919, the Red Summer of 1919, because between May and October, there were a series of riots that happened during that time. Now, we all know about Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks is a staple in America because of the Birmingham bus boycotts. And I like to talk a minute about Rosa Parks because they said sometimes silence is golden. Without even saying a word, Rosa Parks was able to enact change. She was called the mother of civil rights, and they call her the mother of civil rights because she was able to peacefully change some things and policies that we have right now in America as far as buses are concerned. And she was able to what she did was she sat on a bus and she refused to give up her seat to a white American who wanted her seat. At that time, we know that African Americans were not allowed to sit in the front of the bus. They were told to sit in the back of the bus. And if there was a white American who wanted to sit down, then we know that African Americans were told they had to stand. And so Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. She was arrested, as a matter of fact, on December 1st, 1955. And after she was arrested, over 17,000 others decided that they were going to join in on the protest as well. And they were going to boycott the bus. And they started walking. And that's how we got some of the changes that we have today. So I'm going to talk to you about the 1965 Watts. So someone said they didn't know anything about that. But in a neighborhood in central LA, the Watts riots occurred because there was a 21-year-old male who was arrested. At the time, he was on parole for burglary. And he was stopped because the police believed that he may have been intoxicated. Subsequent to the stop, there was a fight or an argument that ensued between him and the officers. The citizens saw some of the things that were going on the side of the road with the officers and this man. And in turn, a riot started occurring because the fight was actually, the argument between him and the officers were minor, but because people had seen so much, so many things going on with police brutality, that they decided that they were tired and they wanted to enact change. And so that's how the Watts riots occurred. And they also called the Watts riots the Watts Rebellion. And so there, in the 6 days that the riots occurred, there were about 34 deaths that happened during that time. So I know everyone knows about Rodney King. Rodney King was stopped by the LA Police Department. He was driving while intoxicated. While he was driving, the police chased him. And at the end of the chase, when he was about to get arrested, the police decided that they were going to, beat Mr. King. Now, there was a man named George Holliday who lived near where Mr. King was stopped, and he witnessed them beating Mr. King. At that time, he called the LA Police Department, and he decided that he was going to call them to ask them will they come out and help Mr. King, but he did not get the response that he wanted. And so in turn, he decided to release this video, which he had recorded with a recorder, to a local TV station. The local TV station then aired the beating on TV. And just as we got to see what happened with Mr. George Floyd unfold before our eyes, we also got to see what happened with Mr. King unfold right before our eyes. So we know that there were riots that occurred because of things that were seen, and there were 45 deaths that occurred. There was over $1 billion in damage that also occurred due to the Rodney King situation. So we know today that like KKK, we know neo-Nazis and other groups exist. So let's talk about the psychology of riots. Why do you think riots occur? In just a little bit, we're going to talk about the difference between protesting, which is demonstrating, riots, and looting. And there's a clear difference between all three. But what do you know about riots? Tell me in the chat feature, what do you know about riots? And why do you think people riot? When you see a group of people rioting, what are some of the unconscious biases that you already have in your head about what's going on? Someone said anger, frustration, last resort. Someone said they think that someone has reached their tipping point. For unconscious bias, someone said angry people make excuses to steal. It typically begins when people are protesting peacefully and it gets out of hand. Someone gets pushed or treated unfairly by law enforcement. Rioters are so angry they have nothing to lose. So the psychology of rioting, we are told that rioting is like an emotional release. Everything is going peacefully. The peaceful demonstrators are there to enact change. The rioters are already on the edge, or some people that may have been peaceful are, just like someone just said, they're at their tipping point. And someone does something, someone throws something into the crowd, or someone says something, or they see the police do something, and then there's an eruption of emotion that is released. And before we know it, things are out of hand. We know that riots, we know they hurt the community. And a lot of people say it's an ineffective way to get our voice heard. And many think that there's a contagious mob mentality when we see people that riot. It can take a life of its own, and we sometimes forget the cause of why we're there anyway when riots occur. And there's a high cost for property and lives. And so we know that rioting is not an effective form of demonstration. So what's the difference between protesting, riots, and looting? Well, we know that protesting, people are safe. They may have the police involved. Maybe they have police escorts with them to ensure that they're safe. We know that it can be an effective change agent. What about rioting? Probably not as effective. There's a destruction of property. There's a potential to get hurt. And we lose all cause for why we're there when we see rioting. We know looting has nothing to do with the cause. There's a selfish motive, and that people are there to get what they can get. There's a destruction of property, and it actually creates more tension in our community. During Atlanta, I know you saw that there were a lot of protests, a lot of riots going on. There were some peaceful protests, but there also were some riots going on. During the riots, a friend of mine had her, she owns a shop, a boutique, and she went to check, and she's African-American, she went to check on the boutique, and she was brutally beaten by some other African-American people. And so when we talk about the cause, we're talking about brutality. And the reason why we're even there or even protesting because of brutality, and then we abuse or are violent toward other people. So it really doesn't serve the cause. And so we need to know that there is a difference, and there are examples that we will talk about how you can be more peaceful, because it's not productive. Rioting, we know, is not productive, and looting is not productive. Someone says it's not always the demonstrators that are rioting. Most of the time, there are agitators in the crowd that are there to make African American look bad. I think there are always agitators in the crowd to make everybody look bad. And so we need to be able to know the difference. So let's talk about some peaceful protesters and some peaceful demonstrators. Do you know anyone on this list? I know you probably know everyone on this list. Do you think there should be anyone added to this list? Well, I can tell you one person that we can add to this list for sure is Mr. John Lewis. He actually studied up under Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and he studied their ability to be nonviolent. And He actually received the Nobel Peace Prize. He actually received several nonviolent and peaceful awards for his ability to demonstrate peacefully and to enact change without violence. Someone says Lincoln, not a protester, but a leader by action. Someone says RIP, yes, rest in peace, Mr. John Lewis. Who else can we add to this list? Colin Kaepernick, we definitely can add him as a peaceful demonstrator. And with using Colin Kaepernick, we can also see that sometimes even being peaceful sometimes does not get change. And what we know, in even adding Colin Kaepernick and John Lewis and other different people to this list, we know that it takes courage to do the things that they did. So tell me about a time that you were sacrificial or you had to have courage, because it took some courage for some of these people, the people on these lists, to do some of the things that they did, to be peaceful, even in the face of danger, even in the face of violence. They were peaceful. And so that took courage. I just want to tell you a story real quick of, while we're waiting on people to tell about some of the courageous things you've done. I want to tell you my own story. When I was 11 years old, my dad was walking through a predominantly white neighborhood, which was also his neighborhood where he lived. And he was walking through a woman's yard, and we now know that it was a Caucasian woman's yard that he was walking through. While he was walking through the yard, she looked out the window and she saw my dad, and she called the police. And what she told the police was, I think someone's trying to break in my house. Now, of course, my dad was not trying to break in her house, but he was walking through her yard. And I live in a small city where there weren't any African-American police officers, especially not African-American female police officers. And so my dad was walking through the neighborhood. As he cleared her yard, the police stopped him. Now, the police told him to stop. He did not stop. He kept walking. He did not run, but he was walking. He was unarmed, and he was shot by the police in the back. And he actually he lived, but he was hurt very badly. The bullet was like an inch from his heart. And so I know you ask yourself, like, how can you become a police officer after something like that? But not only did I become a police officer after that, but I became a police officer and worked for the same police department that shot my father. And I also worked with the guy who actually shot my father. So when I think of courage, I think about, to me, courage is, you got to really have courage in order to forgive someone who never apologizes to you. Now, I talked to this guy who shot my father because I worked with him. He never apologized. He never said any kind or empathetic words to me about why he shot my father. But to me, the ultimate sacrifice to me was just being able to become a police officer so I could be able to see someone, and so children in my community could see someone who looked like them on the police department, on the police force. And so to me, I lost a lot of friends. I lost a lot of family members because my family was very upset with me. They wanted to know, why could you do this? How could you do this? How could you become a police officer and work with someone who did this to your dad? But to me, it was about sacrifice. And I wanted change in our police department in my hometown. And I know in order to see change, you have to be that change. And so that was my story of courage. And I know all of you have probably done some courageous things and sacrificial things, but the people on this list definitely exhibited courage and sacrifice. So I have a question. Someone wants to know, the question disappeared. I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. Do I believe that my view on rioting can come from a desire to be appealing to white people? Do I believe? I'm not sure of the question. So once someone said, my courageousness is just personal stuff, but yes, you have to step up in order to make change. Nothing like those on the list. Well, every little bit of courage is important. And you may not have done something as courageous as the people on the list, but if you've done something that takes courage, you deserve kudos for that. Because it takes a lot to be courageous. So how do we go forward, and how do we talk to our children about everything that's going on around us? Well, we know we need to talk to our children about the issues. Children have social media, news. Now they can talk on gaming platforms. We also know that they can talk to their peers. And so it's up to us as parents. And I say us because I do have a son, and I'm also a grandmother. And so it's up to us as parents to talk to our children about these issues so we can dispel the myths. We can get them to understand the difference. We need to encourage our children to walk away and to be peaceful, and to listen to the nonviolent voices, to find role models within the community that are peaceful. And we need to talk to them, of course, about taking responsibility for everything that's going on, because they can also help. And we'll see on the next slide how they can help. So we know the Birmingham Crusade of 1963 was a way for children to be able to be a part of the movement. And so during this movement, there was a protest going on about, in order to desegregate Alabama, Birmingham, Alabama, and to allow integration into public facilities for African Americans. Now, some of the adults were afraid to protest because they could lose their houses, they could lose their cars, they could lose their jobs, and they didn't want to be seen protesting. So they felt like their hands were tied. So some of the teenagers and children came up with the idea that they wanted to be able to march. And of course, it took courage for them to decide this, but they decided that some of them asked their parents, some of their parents said, no, you can't participate. But some of them decided upon themselves, they were going to meet at the 6th Street Baptist Church, where the march started, to downtown Birmingham. And they were going to skip class and meet at this place so they can be a part of the movement. Now, was the total march nonviolent? No. And some of the children were met by police, some of them got hurt, some of them got arrested, but it took a lot of courage for them to do that. So there are ways that children can be involved in helping to get the message out about things that's going on in the community. So as we look at all the things that are going on, we see that demonstration works because there are a lot of things that have changed. We know that policies have been changed. Look at the TV shows we have now. We have African American and minority directors and owners of TV stations and channels. We have interracial relationships that we get to see now. We have gay marriages. All of the athletes that have paved the way for all the athletes we see today. We see a very diverse NFL, NBA. We see politicians. We just had our first African-American president. And so we now get to see the fruits of the labor of some of the people that came before us. And so my question to you is, what can we do? And I'll ask that question again at the end, but what can we do? What are we doing? we may not see the change that we want to see in our generation, but what are we doing to prepare change for the next generation, or the generation after that, or the generation after that? Even as a mother, I told you I have a son, and so my son, he's now 28, going on 28 years old, and my son was pulled over by police. And with me being a police officer, my son always calls me if something is going on, because he always wants to get my feedback in my direction. But we went over 1,000,000 times. What do you do, son, if you're pulled over by police? What are some of the things that you can do? And we talked about it, like, from growing up. And he knows the law like the back of his hand. And so my son called me one day. He was riding in my truck, and he called me. He said, like, "Mom, I'm pulled over by the police," and he's scared, and at this time, I think he was probably in his late teens or early 20s. And he was like, "Mom, I'm scared. I'm pulled over by the police." And I was like, "Son, don't be scared. It's okay." And he's like, "Mom, the police," I hear the police officer in the background literally saying, "Hey, put down the phone, put down the phone." My son is crying. He's upset. He's afraid to take me off of the phone because he's so scared about everything that's going on. And so I'm crying, he's crying, because it was a scary moment for me as well as a parent. And I never thought that a job that I picked as my career, that I would be afraid for my own child to encounter someone that is in the same field that I'm in. And so it was a very upsetting moment. My son cried, I cried, and we just looked back at things that went on during that stop, and it was so scary. And so as parents, we have to be able to talk to our kids about these things, and we can't hide things from them, because one day they might encounter something that they may have to be courageous and act upon. And so we need to make sure we have these conversations with them. So if you see something that is not right, it's your moral obligation to do something. And so my question to you is, what are you doing? What have you done? There's a book that I want to challenge you to read if you haven't. It's Shonda Rhimes is, got the name of the book already, I'm sorry. It's, forget about it. So I want you to make sure that you do something. What can you do to enact change? So tell me in the chat feature, what can you do to add? And I just remember, it's Shonda Rhimes, The Year of Yes. And the book is about having the courage to take the change, to make change. And even the little things that we do, they seem so difficult, but if we only tap into that courage, then we can be able to enact change. So I challenge you to read The Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes. And also tell me something that you plan to do from moving forward to be intentional about creating change. This is a call to action. What do you plan to do to enact change? Someone said vote. That's very important. Get out and vote. Someone says they want to add some people to the list: Muhammad Ali, Bill Russell, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Willie O'Ree, Jimmy Brown. Someone said, when asked for referrals, I looked at LinkedIn connection, make sure I'm thinking about all my connections, not just my white peers. Good, looking for diversity. Expanding your network, educating about civic engagements, increasing diversity in your organizations. Someone says giving people opportunities. Someone says they plan to be a videography witness. Okay, vote. Someone says vote peacefully, protest, educate others, speak up when wrong. And some others to add to the list: John Lennon, Mother Teresa. We're going to add them to the list. Someone says vote, vote, vote. Someone said participate in programs like this, educate yourselves. I challenge you to go out and learn more. Read, educate yourselves on not only things that are going on now, but educate yourself on the history. It's important. Contribute to organizations dedicated to social justice, vote and educate. Engaging personal learning, professional development is important. Making a priority to continue to educate everyone in the college community. Sharing Black history with youth and people of other races. So someone had a question I'm going to answer. Are there times when people of color might be influenced by the desire to appeal to white people? Of course. Some of us have the innate ability to be people pleasers. And so we can be easily influenced by the desire to please all people, not just white people, but or appeal to all people. Everybody wants to be liked. Nobody wants friction. And so we have to be a society that has the courage to stand up when we see something that's wrong and not appeal to people just because we want to be liked or because we're afraid to cause waves. If we look at the people on the list that I've talked about here today, if they just sat back and never caused waves, and I like to quote Mr. John Lewis on this, there's a such thing as good trouble. And so good trouble is doing what you think is right, even when you know that you may have unfavorable action or that it may not be received by people like the way you want it to be received. And so that takes courage as well. Okay, so I want to go over everything that we talked about here today. I hope that you were able to learn a little bit about our history, why we demonstrate. I hope you got to learn a little bit about some of the people that have paved the way for us today to be, to get some of the liberties that we now have. I hope that you were able to learn what do you say to your kids, or how can you be a role model for your children? What you can do moving forward, how can you be more intentional about making change, about sharing with others, about expanding your knowledge about the issues surrounding things that are happening today. And I hope that you take that call of action seriously, because not only am I telling you that, but for me as well. We all can learn every day, and we all have something to contribute. And it just takes the ability to want to change and to have the courage. And I want to thank everyone for listening to me today. And I hope you were able to take something away from this session.
I think I'm unmuted now. You certainly gave us all courage, and you gave me courage today. And I think that by learning about the history of demonstrating, we are focused here on our time, but our country and the world has a history of effective and peaceful demonstrations. By focusing on the children, you're sharing your own story of your dad and your son, and your work was so inspiring, and really giving a call to action to everybody. was so effective. I'm watching, as we were talking here, some of the comments in the chat room, and I know that everybody on today really was given some very thought-provoking and substantive things to consider as we move forward and as we watch the news and as things happen that will come up. So we thank you for your really thoughtful work and for everything that you've done in your life. You're an inspiration to us, Sherry Gilbert. So thank you so very, very much. I want to also thank again our event partners, the Business Council of New York State, Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors, Hudson Valley Gateway Chamber of Commerce, New York State Economic Development Council, the Westchester Putnam Workforce Development Board, and the Putnam County Business Council, and of course, Balancing Life's Issues and our great partner, Wendy Wallner, who works with us so very closely to put this series together. There are 4 more in these series. The next 2 are in August. August 4th, Coping with Civil Unrest. That's a Tuesday at 11. And also Safe Care in the Face of Trauma on August 11th, which is also a Tuesday at 11. Again, we ask you to share these sessions, to learn more from them. I know I go back to them and I listen again. And we're very, very proud at the Business Council of Westchester to be able to provide these sessions to so many businesses and organizations throughout New York. So I wish everybody health and safety, and wear your masks, please. Thank you all.